Alright, so we're moving right along with our National Treasure project here, and we've created the background, and in this video we're actually going to create that pyramid effect that I showed you at the end of the last video. And since we've got our background all set, I'm going to go over my layers panel, and I'm going to go ahead and select all these layers. I'm going to select that top layer, and I'm going to shift click this bottom layer, and it will highlight all those layers. And I'm going to go into the flyout menu here and just choose New Group from Layers. And I'll just give us a name, call it Background. We'll click OK. So now it's put all of those layers into a group folder, and it just unclutters my layers panel a little bit so I can get to work on the next step. So let's go ahead and create a new blank layer above that one, and I'm going to go ahead and turn off this background group because I don't need it to be visible right now for the part I'm going to be working on. But we'll turn it back on later. So on this blank layer, I'm going to go over here and grab my pen tool. And right in the center of the document, I'm going to hold down my Shift key. I'm just going to click once at the very top here, and I'm still holding down that Shift key. I'm going to click toward the bottom here, and that will give me a straight up and down line. Then I'm going to go ahead and go to the left here just a little ways, still holding down the Shift key, and I'm just going to click once more. That will give me that right angle there. Well, releasing the Shift key, I'm just going to come up here to about this angle here and click once, and then I'm going to click up to the very top point, closing out the shape. Alright, so there's the basic shape. I'm going to turn this path into a selection by simply pressing Command Enter right on the keyboard. And it'll be Control Enter on a PC. So with the selection active on that blank layer, I'm going to press Shift Delete and bring up the Fill dialog, and we're going to use 50% gray. Click OK. Then I'm going to go and deselect it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. Drag it down here and make a duplicate. I'm going into the Edit menu, and this time we're going to go to Transform, Flip Horizontal. Then I'm just going to grab my Move tool and just nudge this over till those two edges snap together just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and merge these two layers together by pressing Command or Control E. So now that shape is on its own layer. I'm going to press Command or Control T to bring up Free Transform and just kind of modify the overall shape here. It's a little wider than I want it to be, so I'm just going to manipulate that shape to right about there. And I'll just press Enter. So there's the basic shape. Well, now I got to cut it up. I got to separate the bottom part from this front face so it looks more three-dimensional. Well, I'm going to take I've got my rulers open here, and if you don't have your rulers up, you can simply press Command or Control R, and the rulers will appear. I'm going to click inside the ruler and just drag a guide down to this point right about here, where these 2 points, these corner points are. And I'll make drawing my selection a little bit easier for what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm just going to draw a selection until it snaps to that guide and it covers that entire bottom area. And then on that layer, I'm going to press Shift Command J. That would be Shift Control J. And what it's going to do is actually copy. No, it's not going to copy. It's actually going to cut that area from the layer and put it up on its own layer. If I turn this layer on and off, you can see it didn't make a copy. It actually cut it and pasted it right on the next layer. So I don't need that guide anymore, so I'm just going to go ahead and throw that out. So there I've got the two pieces of my pyramid. Well, I'm going to highlight the main face, and I'm going to Command or Control click directly on it to load it as a selection. And you can see it's just selected the front face. We'll go into the Select menu and choose Modify and go down here to Contract. And we're going to give it a fairly big contraction, about 25 pixels, and we'll click OK. Then I'm going to copy this selected area to its own layer. Not like we did before with Shift Command J, but we're just going to press Command J, and that will simply copy that area. If I turn it on or off, you can't see any change because it's the same color fill, but it is there. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off that background layer and turn off this layer, and this is that inset layer. If I turn on the one behind it, there's the bigger one, there's the smaller one. So working on the smaller triangle, I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool, and we're just going to draw a selection right across that area like that, and just press Delete. So that'll give us two distinct shapes. Well, I want to go ahead and copy this top triangle to its own layer. So I'm going to select just that area and press Shift Command J. So now, if I turn on all these layers, there's our pyramid. We've got, if I turn these all off and turn them back on, we've got the face, the front area, which these two triangles, which you can't see because they're the same color, but we'll get to those in a moment, and of course the bottom piece. Well, now let's create the textures that are going to go inside of here. I'm going to go over here and grab my rectangular marquee tool. I'm just going to draw a large marquee selection over the entire area. And I'm going to create a new blank layer right above that triangle layer. Then I'll press Shift Delete and go ahead and fill this with 50% gray and deselect. Now, let's go into the filter menu and choose Texture, Texturizer. And inside here, we're going to go into the flyout menu and go down here and load the texture. And these textures are located inside your Photoshop folder in the presets inside textures. And we want to look for the one that is called Stucco 2. And we'll just click load. Let's go ahead and zoom out the window there. I'm going to set my scaling to 100%, and the relief, I'm only going to put it 5. And we'll go ahead and hit OK. Now, with that fill over that triangle, you can actually see the other shapes here, which I'm going to go ahead and turn these off for now while we're working on this one particular layer. Now, that texture is set. I'm going to apply another texture just to give it a little bit of mixture. I'm going to go over here to Texture, and we're going to go down here to this crocular, however you pronounce it. But I like this because it interacts with the texturizer that I just applied really kind of cool. I'm going to decrease these settings to bring them down kind of low. Just don't want the texture to be really overbearing. And that looks like it's pretty good. All right. So the texture set, I'm just going to clip this inside of that shape by holding down my Option or Alt key, and then just going to click once between the layers, and it will clip that area inside. Alright, so with that texture clipped inside of this shape, let's go ahead and create the texture for the bottom area, which is this layer right here. If I turn that on, this is the bottom area of the pyramid. This kind of gives it a 3D look. But I'm going to go ahead and use part of the texture for this front face that we created. So I'm going to highlight that layer. I'm going to grab my rectangular marquee tool. I'm just going to drag out a selection just to copy and paste a chunk of this texture onto its own layer. And with that area selected, I'm going to press Command or Control J, and there is a copy of that selected area on its own layer. So let's go ahead and take the shape. This is the initial shape. I'm just going to drag it to the bottom of the layer order, so it's right beneath the main shape there. And we're going to take that texture shape and put it right above it. Then I'm going to take that with my move tool and just kind of move it so it's moving, so it's positioned right over top of that shape. And just like we did with this top shape, I'm going to clip it inside of that layer by holding down my Option or Alt key, clicking in between the layers, and there you have it. So I'm going to make the perspective of that a little bit more believable by pressing Command or Control T on the shape. Notice I'm working on the texture shape, not the actual shape itself. And with that free transform in place, I'm going to press the Control key or right click on it, and we'll get this little menu. I'm going to choose Perspective. And I'm just going to grab this right handle here and just kind of push it in, just so these lines here match up the perspective lines of this right here. And then we'll press Enter. So we've got the shapes, we've got the textures applied. Let's go and work on these two shapes here. Well, I'm going to select this big shape first. I'm going to go and turn that top one off. And we're going to go ahead and apply a texture directly to this shape. I'm going to go into the filter menu, go to Texturizer, just like we did before. And this time in the texture menu, we're going to use brick. You know, earlier we went to and loaded the texture, but I want to use one of the preset brick textures. And we're going to set the scaling at 200% and the relief to 10. I'm going to go ahead and leave the light set to top right, and we'll click OK. And now, to give us a little bit of depth so it separates itself from the outer shape, I'm going to give it a subtle bevel. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that layer to bring up the layer styles, and it's going to apply a bevel and emboss. I'm going to change the direction here to down, and I'm just going to increase that depth quite a bit. And that gives me a little bit more believability there. I'm going to turn off global light and just bring the angle into the center a little bit more. That looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and click OK. So there's that shape. Let's go into the top shape where we're going to place the eye. Now, in my original design, I actually illustrated the eye inside of there, and it would certainly take a tremendous amount of time to go ahead and do that. So I thought I would show you how you can go ahead and use an actual photograph of an eye if you weren't inclined to actually draw one. So here I have just a basic photo. I'm just going to draw a selection over the general eye area here. And I'm just going to take the move tool and drag and drop it to this document. Position it right over this shape. Let's go ahead and minimize this file here. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the color information by pressing Shift Command U. And I'm going to process this a couple of different ways. I'm actually going to go under the Image menu to Adjustments. Go down here to Posterize. And I'm going to set it to about 10 level posterization. Actually, no. Let's go a little bit higher. About 15. And that just kind of removes a little bit of the detail. It gives it a little bit more of a graphic look to it. Then I'm going to go into the filter menu and go to texture again. And this time we're going to use mosaic tiles. And as you can see, if I set the tile size relatively low, and in this case it's around 1, or 2 rather, and keeping the grout width relatively low and the lighten grout, at around 6, it kind of gives a really grungy stone look to it, which is exactly what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And as we did with all the other shapes, I'm going to clip this eye shape inside of that shape there by holding down my Option or Alt key, clipping inside. And because it's on its own layer, I can position it anywhere just like that. I'm going to bring up my levels and just kind of use my center slider here just to kind of lighten that up a little bit, so it kind of the tone of it kind of matches the rest of the shape. So it's looking a little dark there. And we'll click OK. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply the same bevel I applied to the brick texture to this layer here, and I'm going to do that really quickly and easily by holding down my Option or Alt key. Then I'm going to click directly on this FX icon and drag it right to this layer, and it will copy that layer style right to that layer. So one last thing to do is just give us some color. I'm going to go over here to my adjustment layer menu, and we're going to choose hue saturation, and make sure you're at the very top of the layer order with this adjustment layer, so it colors everything. I'm going to click colorize, and let's move the hue over to the kind of a yellowish gold. Increase that saturation right about there, and that looks pretty good. And of course could tweak this a little bit more. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this bottom texture inside there. I'm going to actually bring up levels by pressing Command or Control L and just darken that up so it has kind of a shadow, a little bit more dimension to it. And we'll push that right about there, and we'll click OK. Then if I turn on my background, you can start to see it's coming together. It's looking pretty good. Now, this adjustment layer is applying to the entire background. If I turn it off, you can see the background looks different. So if I want to isolate it just to this shape, I'm going to load the entire shape as a selection. Let's go ahead and Command or Control click directly on this shape. And then keeping the Command or Control key held down, I'm going to add the Shift key to it, and you can see I can add other layers to the selection. So I'll click this main shape here, and it gets that entire thing. Let's highlight the layer mask of my adjustment layer. And I'm going to press Shift Command I to invert the selection so the background is selected, and then just fill it with black so it masks out that part of the adjustment layer by pressing Option Delete, since black is set as my foreground color. Then just deselect, and there we have it. Now, on the next video, next week, we'll get into a little bit more detail on this texture, and then we'll start playing around with the text itself for the main title.